White.
Mrs. Washington, I am so glad to see you.
I am so pleased to see
It has
you.
been
It's
so long since I
the
saw
war.
you and George.
Yes, Thomas,
Oh.
you knew my husband.
Oh, of course.
You helped us in the war efforts, and you were in the Boston Massacre. No, it was the Tea Party.
That is correct.
Oh, tell us a little bit about your life.
Well,
It's been so long since I've
just
seen
to,
you.
to remit a little history, you know, I was born in Ireland, and the British there were, they were being mean towards the Irish people because the Protestants and the Catholics, we weren't part of the Anglican Church, and so there was religious persecution.
Kind of like the Pilgrims.
And so when I was 15, I left Ireland to come to America to start a new way of life. And I went to Boston. And that's where I met your husband, George, and Paul Revere, and Samuel Adams, and other famous people from that
You
time.
were such a part of our lives.
And I found out that they were having the same problems that we had in Ireland. And so we decided to form a secret society called the Sons of Liberty.
The Sons
Because
of
we
Liberty.
wanted to strike back against the Redcoats
Yes.
for taxation without representation, and for quartering of soldiers and the Intolerable Acts. And then
Quartering soldiers. Oh,
they were
yes.
putting soldiers into people's homes so they didn't have to pay rent.
Oh,
And we had a plan, we came up with a plan, that we would dress as Native Americans. And we
you
heard
were
that
disguising yourself.
yes,
And they still
and
knew
the
who you
East
were.
India Bay Company was bringing in a ship loaded with tea. 354 bags of tea. And when
I heard that's
we
equivalent
boarded
to
that ship
$2
that
million
night,
today.
and we got up there and we grabbed those things and we just started throwing them in Boston
You
Harbor.
threw the tea over the ball.
Yeah, and then we had to get out of there real quick because the redcoats were coming, and
Oh.
they never caught us. But you know, afterwards, the king and his parliament and his soldiers decided to be more harsh towards us in
They
Massachusetts.
charged even more. I remember that happening.
Yeah.
It was such a difficult time. This was the same year that my daughter died. And the Boston Tea Party, we were having trouble without and trouble within. Wow, this is exciting that I get to see you again, Mr. Thomas. The Boston Tea Party. Oh, your neighbor was there too, wasn't he?
Paul Revere,
Paul Revere.
yes.
Oh, Paul Revere, do you remember? Have you heard of Paul Revere?
Yeah.
And how he rode through the streets, the British were coming, the British were coming. Well, that was your neighbor, Paul Revere.
And he was another member of the Sons of Liberty.
Okay, yes.
And then the war came.
Oh, yes. Well, George walked into the Burgess house, and he was dressed in his military uniforms, and they knew the war was upon us, that we had no choice but to stand against this taxation and that which was oppressing us. Yeah. And you were helping in some of these battles of encampment.
That is correct. I joined the Continental Army. First, I was in the 1st Pennsylvania Infantry, but then your husband enlisted me to be as his aide, as a man that I had to handle the dispatches. So when General Washington needed to send information to his commanders in the field, he would give me the information and I would write them out, and then I would make sure that we had men on horseback that could ride to each one of the encampments and help the people and give them their orders. And if there were nobody available, I would jump on a horse and I would ride there with the information. It was so critical for the next coming battles.
I know, George often mentioned, is Tom here? Is he going to be sending out the dispatches?
The war was horrible,
Yeah, oh,
especially the winter encampments. The men didn't have
Valley
enough
Forge.
clothes. They didn't have enough food. We were so encouraged by Mother, what they call you? Mother Dragoon?
Yeah,
Yeah, Mother Dragoon with you and all the other women
I
showing
had
up.
about 500 women helping me.
Yes.
Well, some of them I met later on, and they helped us in the presidency. But yes, they helped. We had to cook and it would sew, and sometimes we had to bury the dead, and it was stenches of horses laying around. It was a very difficult time. But I decided.
Mrs. Washington, can I share a story from Valley Forge? You
Yes.
probably remember this. It's the candlestick.
Oh, is Do you have my candlestick?
No, ma'am.
Oh, what happened to my candlestick?
It's somewhere in the family.
Oh,
Now,
well,
I only had a candle and it was dark, and the general gave me some orders, and I didn't know have a candlestick, so I took a potato and I stuck it right in that potato and sat there and started writing out, and then the general came out from his tent and said, "You need a candlestick." And he had one, I think it was silver or maybe lead, that was made by
Oh.
Paul Revere.
he was a silversmith.
And he came out and said, "Here you go," and yes, I still have it. It's somewhere in the family.
That's fine. I'm glad George helped you and he was a generous and honest man. I love my George, yes. Thank you. Thank you for seeing you and participating. What happened to you? What happened after the war? Where did you go? I haven't seen you since then.
Well, I was done with warfare. I do have to tell one more story. And so I had married a young woman.
Oh, I know her.
She was only 15 when I was 30
Yes,
when we
we
married.
did needlepoint together.
We had we eventually had 21 kids.
Well,
But I moved
some
out
of them
west,
passed away.
western Pennsylvania, and I built a log cabins and farm.
A new farm. Okay, thank you. You went on, well, you took care of the family and you became a frontiersman afterwards. Well,
So we'd like to hear one more story.
well, after the 1783, when the war ended, that was when we had a parade. We had a parade up in New York. I will go ahead and share with you what happened with us after the war. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I'll talk to you again later. So what happened after the